when you're writing, just write what you're hearing really genuinely. Don't worry about keys. Don't worry about it making it fit on your instrument. Just write it as you hear it. And then later, when you're adjusting for whatever instrumentation is for your ensemble, you can change the key, and you might find that you're starting to play in different keys that you might not have otherwise too. But so for the writing process now, and early on when I started, I think I just started small. And I think for anyone who feels overwhelmed while writing their own music or not sure where to start, there's nowhere to start. I mean, every time, even now, I've written quite a bit of music now, but I feel like every time I start, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think it's one of those things that never really leaves, like that element of feeling unsure as how to start. I think that's constant. And I've heard that too with people who write books and poetry and literary writers. I think they find the same thing. You just have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So usually now what my process includes is starting with a very short idea.
Okay.
And I do have a book of manuscript. I have several books of manuscript, but I'll start with a 2-bar phrase. It might be a bass line. It might just be a melody, something that I find compelling, but it's really short. And I'll just write that idea down really quickly when I think of it, or if I'm sitting at the piano and noodling around. And then I might leave it, and I might just flip the page and write a different idea, or, I have a book of different ideas. And then I might come back to those ideas later and then see if I can develop it. Or perhaps if it's like in the example of a melody, I might just try to find a bass counterpart. Awesome. So keeping things really simple, I think actually entails a lot, because you can take things quite far if you just think of it in a simple way.
Right.
So part of it's mindset and just being open to hearing different sounds using a very simple cell of an idea. Maybe it's a rhythm that really inspires you. So write it out or record yourself and see if you can start layering ideas on top. So that's kind of how my ideas stem, is just one thing, and then I put something else on top.
Right.
And that if that inspires a new section, I'll write that. Or maybe I might just keep layering. Sometimes I have ideas for vamps, and I'll just write a melody or 2 or 3 on top and seeing which one works. Or maybe I end up using that later in the process by distributing those parts amongst the instruments later. So trying to keep an open mind as to how the mechanics might work and not being too particular, I think really helps.
Would you mind taking us through that process right now? And
Absolutely.
Awesome. So let's do that.
So I picked 2 songs. I think they're both from my latest album.
Great.
Only because I think they're a little bit more tangible to describe just some of the ideas that I started with. So I'm not going to play the entire piece. I'm going to start with the actual seed of the idea that I started with each of these pieces.
Great.
So I'll start with one that I wrote a bass line for. This one's called Morning. And Jesse, I'll send you the chart so that maybe you can link in the description if anybody listening wants to look at it. I'm happy to share it. So this one I had to wake up really early one morning. And as I was making some tea in the kitchen, this bass line came to me. And I wasn't even sure exactly what it was, but it was basically this. And that was it. So I just came to the piano, tried to figure out what notes those were. And when I was in the kitchen, I just sang it. So that's like a great tip actually I got from a teacher, is when you're writing, just write what you're hearing really genuinely. Don't worry about keys. Don't worry about it making it fit on your instrument. Just write it as you hear it. And then later, when you're adjusting for whatever instrumentation is for your ensemble, you can change the key, and you might find that you're starting to play in different keys that you might not have otherwise too. And that's a great platform for you to start practicing in different keys. That's kind of how, as I was developing as a saxophone player after forming my band, writing became the ultimate vehicle to practice new ideas, because I might shift a key after having transposed it to fit my saxophone, and now I'm playing in like D flat and B flat and A flat, and keys that I wouldn't have really written for otherwise, or intuitively written for.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess
I was gonna say, I find that's really interesting because your process seems very organic, and you seem to have worked in the process of composing into your life daily. So something as grabbing a cup of tea and just being aware of the inspiration around, and treating that idea as something legitimate and then pursuing it, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And even now, I would say, like, to be honest, I don't write every day. I do, like, now, of course, in the midst of quarantine, I haven't had any like urgent projects to write for, but typically when I have a deadline coming up, or perhaps it's a gig, I just want to get a new song out and try to play it with the band. I will go through a week of like committing to writing and really keeping my ears open.
Right.
And I find when I'm in that kind of mode or that mental space, I'm like recording on my phone, I'm using my digital recorder, I'm at my piano very regularly just to keep the flow open.
Right.
And I might not even use half the ideas I come up with, but I'm just trying to write anything down. And I think just getting into that habit, if you're in that headspace, is really, really good.
That's great.
Because it just gets the juices flowing, you know? I know people say it's very cliche to say that, but for me, it's actually worked.
So what did you do with that bass line after you captured the idea?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so perhaps anyone who's listening, if you guys can take a look at the chart. So that bass note, so this is my F on the piano. And then the next line is a similar figure. It's going up to F sharp, and I'm going F sharp, D, E. So for those of us who are comfortable with different types of chords and qualities, we know that these notes that I use with the F bass line, it's F, C, and D.
Yeah.
That could be a lot of things. I mean, initially it could just be F major with a 6. You could be implying a D minor 7 if you put a D in the bass. It could be a G sus chord with that upper structure using the 7, the 4, and the 5. So there's a lot of openness to that. And I think if you can see the plurality in shapes, that really starts opening your ears to different sounds.
Yeah.
For me, in this case, I just stuck with the first chord being F major. So to me, that sounded truer to the intent that I was hearing originally. So it's kind of like really getting in touch with what sound resonates with you when you first heard it, and try to mix and match. Does that sound like what you were hearing, or maybe there's a different shape? If I, for example, just to illustrate, if I wanted a D minor sound, I'm implying that D in the bass. Or if I wanted that sus sound of a G in the bass. But that's not really what I was going for. I think I'm really hearing. So it's just really simple in that case. It just happened to work out that it's simple. The next shape, however, I'm taking the notes now, F sharp, D, and E. So similar idea. I went through a lot of different options using those notes. What notes, or rather what chords contain those notes? There's quite a few options. In my case, I decided it was a slash chord. I was hearing quite clearly that it's the F sharp that I use in the line is the bass note, and it's a D chord on top. So here's the shape now when I fill in my harmony. So that upper structure is, I'm going to shift it down. So from there, I would just start singing melodies. And so what I did with this tune is I looped that vamp, those 2 chord structures, and I just started singing. And for me, I'm not a self-proclaimed singer. I sing in the shower, that's what I like to say. But I think singing is the most intuitive musical instrument that we all have. And that's why I'm a really firm believer. I mean, I actually have never really tried composing on the saxophone before. I think that might be something that would be interesting for me to try at some point. But for me, it's singing, because I find I get to the most intuitive melodies that just sound like true to me without any assistance of the instrument that I play. So I just started singing. And so I came up with the melody. So, sorry.
No, I was going to say, what's interesting to me about the progression is that even though it's two very simple chords, that there's a relationship between them, even though they're not necessarily both diatonic to the tonal center, but there's a sense of movement that you're creating with those two chords. And I feel like if that's a really good place to start. You know, a lot of people, when they just begin writing, they have a hard time using the nuts and bolts of music, harmony, rhythm, melody, to create a sense of movement. And I think that's a really good place to start, with just having a simple idea, but there's some sense of movement happening just from within that simple idea, and then adding elements to that is a really good approach.
Yeah, and I think I might come to that naturally, just wanting to hear a little bit of a change. I mean, certainly there are chord progressions where there's subtle movement,
right?
But certainly when we get into more dramatic shifts, I mean, I guess it just depends on what the intention is behind what you're writing.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're just being true to what you're genuinely hearing inside your head, and what you're, I mean, a lot of people compare writing to like active transcription, but what you're transcribing yourself, you're transcribing your own idea.
Yeah.
So I try to use that analogy almost like I'm just transcribing what I hear. And sure, I'm going to try a lot of things. Maybe the two chords, the shift that happens is a bit more vanilla sounding, like it's not as dramatic. And that's fine too. If that's what you're going for, it's great. But in this case, and certainly in some of my other pieces, I do tend to want to hear a bit of a color change.
Yeah.
Because you're right, like that implies more momentum.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for something more like with motion, you can think of experimenting with different chord color shifts, because that's what's going to invoke change or sense of change. And as a result, it kind of propels the song a bit forward in a certain way.
Yeah.
And then of course, like combinations of things, right? Like you may not want to have dramatic chord shifts for every section of the piece. It's going to lend itself in different ways in different parts.
Yeah. So just
creating
like, balance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like maybe what some like people can also transcribe some of their favorite composers. That's something I did too, just to get a sense of what colors my idols are using, and seeing if I can apply that in a way to my own writing.
Great. Great.
Yeah. So I would just loop that shape. So again. And just keep going and going. And then I would end up singing the song. So I think I came up with, so I went, da, 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 ba, da, ba, do. That's the first 4 bars of that melody. And when I was writing it, it was just something I sang. But I tried a lot of other shapes and ideas singing. Yeah. And that's the one that sounded like very strong to me. And something I think I strive to do in my writing also is like writing melodies that I can sing.
Right.
And it's probably because that's part of my process. But to me, I think you kind of get towards a little bit closer, a more melodic approach. Yeah. Because you have to sing it.
Right. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there are pieces that I write that are a lot more like saxophone line, or more friendly to the technicality of how I would play it on the saxophone. Yeah. But I couldn't necessarily sing very quickly. Right. But I did sing it slowly when I was writing it.
Right. I mean, and you can always just sing a shape rather than the exact notes as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If it's more complex, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Right. But I think like the singing tool for me is like has been a very strong component in my writing.
Great.
Yeah. And then there's another piece, but only if we have time. We can also skip it.
Let's do it.
It's very short. And again, I'm just going to break down the structure that I used. So this next piece is called Looking Up, and I can share, maybe I can share the first page of this one.
Sure.
If you want to share it with the listeners.
Yeah, that would be great.
But for this one, so I was really fortunate to take some piano lessons with a great piano teacher in Toronto named Frank Falco.
Okay.
And I just wanted, like, I kind of went to him originally to have him show me some different piano voicings because I use piano so much as a tool for writing.
Yeah.
And it became kind of a theory lesson slash kind of showing of different voicings. I couldn't play a lot of things in time, but he really exposed me to a lot of different sounds.
Okay.
And there was one lesson where we were exploring clusters and very, very simple clusters. So this particular one that ended up inspiring this tune is a semitone with a fifth on top. And so we get this shape.
I love that sound.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And it's super simple, right?
Yeah.
But in the same way that when I was writing the bass line can imply a lot of things. Like I came up with that figure. It ended up being the bass line of my piece, but it could have been an upper structure melodic fragment, and I could have changed the bass part.
Yeah.
So being open to like which parts of writing it can change. Yeah. In this case, I use these clusters as an upper structure. So I really like these ideas. So I kind of started playing around with what these clusters can be. And the opening shape of this piece called Looking Up is this. And I just came up with that, and I just happened to like that combination of that shape. So again, it's semitone with a fifth from that second note. So in the first case, it's C, D flat, A flat. That's the first one. And I'm just simply transposing it to a combination or sequence that I liked.
Yeah.
So again. And then I continue to transpose that shape. See if I can play the next one. So the next one was, and then the next shape is.
Nice.
And that's the second 4 bars of that piece. And then finding a bass part, because I kind of had an idea. I wanted those pitches to resonate in a high register on the piano.
Okay.
So in that case, that takes part of the fact that it's upper structure. I had to come up with the bass part.
Right.
So kind of trial and error, trying different bass notes with that combination of notes, and looping it in a way, if people are savvy using like GarageBand or any kind of looping sequencer, there's so much great software now that you can kind of record yourself and loop things. Yeah. Those are tools that I've used in the past, just like loop it a lot and see if you can sing parts on top, or what are you hearing intuitively on top of that.
You know, so now that you've broken down a portion of your writing process, it's clear to me that you have a really good grasp on the idea of counterpoint, because you're talking about one instrument as in like the upper structure part, and then being aware of how you can balance that with the bass part and all that. And that's something that I find some young composers don't have yet. Just the concept of balancing instruments, and then from a frequency point of view, but then also from a rhythmic point of view. Do you have any thoughts on how do you incorporate counterpoint into your writing process? Is it an active thing, or is it more of a subconscious thing for you?
I think a little bit of both. Okay. I would say, I mean, for anyone listening, like certainly transcribe the writing that you like try to figure out what the composers who you kind of naturally gravitate to, try to see if you can figure out what they're doing, because that will certainly inform you as to just the mechanics of what's happening. On a more simpler note, I was fortunate to take an arranging class when I attended college, and it was everything from like big band writing. I'm sure you took a similar class, right?
Yeah,
did you take out big band? Yeah. So even though I don't write for big band now, I learned a great deal, and a lot of it is about contrast. Right. And so I think some of the lessons I took from those years of studying arranging was being very clear about what's in the foreground and what's in the background, and how that can shift certainly throughout a piece. Yeah. But being really clear about what's happening right now and what should be maybe less important but still happening.
Right.
And then rotating that shape.
Right.
Color changes. That contrast might also happen with register. So if there's something high, what's happening down low? Similarly, if there's a frequently repeating pattern, perhaps the other part should be stagnant or more stationary, so as to create contrast and so it doesn't sound too chaotic. So just finding balance in shape, color, rhythm, frequency of rhythm. Those are things that I do actively think about, though it's not always super technical for me. Like, I'm trying to think. So like that first piece, if I have a moving part, my melody right now, when I started those first 4 bars, a lot of them are held notes with a little bit of motion.
Right.
And I don't know if I would have thought of it technically, that's what I was doing, but when I sang it, I want to hear something that sits for a bit longer.
Right.
So that moving part can come through
right.
in a way that's still clear and it's not being buried by a very, very active melody. Now, perhaps an active melody could suit the piece with a moving bass part, but in that case, with the tempo that I chose, it made more sense to have a more stationary type melody. But yeah, just in short, thinking of contrast, and that applies to every aspect of the writing. So rhythm, harmony, melody, trying to change things up and not having too much active at once.
So you said these 2 examples were from your most recent album?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll make sure that our audience had a chance to check that out as well.
Yeah.
How has this process of writing and playing the music with your band, how has it helped you to evolve as a saxophone player?
Ooh, well, I think probably kind of what I touched on a little bit earlier is that when you write your own music, you're creating templates for yourself and often new vehicles for yourself to practice ideas. Perhaps it's scales, maybe it's like different pentatonic scales or something like that. So you can take something very concrete that you're aspiring to play, but when you play it in a new context, and that would be like a piece that you wrote, or maybe even a really short little vamp that you came up with on your own, just something that you generated yourself, you start hearing that shape in different ways. So for example, just to be very concrete, something that I've continued to practice since graduating school are bebop scales and finding different ways to implement them. And certainly I want to use them over bebop heads and Charlie Parker songs, and also some other jazz standards that I love. But when I use them in my own pieces, it suddenly takes on a slightly different sound that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. Yeah. So I may try to play some bebop scales over some of these vamps that I created, and now they don't sound like typical bebop scales. Or maybe they do to the average listener, but I'm finding a new way to approach it. Right. And I think as a result, that expands the way you're thinking about something as concrete as a scale and gets you to think about it in a different way. Right. So I would say, I mean, I really credit my writing for having pushed me to develop as a performing saxophone player, a more technical saxophone player in a different way than I would have if I was playing somebody else's music.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a really important process for me to develop as a saxophone player as well.
Right. So in that way, you sort of continue to evolve through the process of composition.
I think so. For me, the two are quite connected, quite deeply connected. I mean, I strive to develop as a saxophone player. I strive to develop as a composer. But I think as I continue to write, I inherently develop different ideas as a saxophone player just because it's part of me trying to play my own music and trying to figure out new ways to go around navigating that harmony or that rhythm.
You know, Allison, you've no doubt been able to carve out a really unique sound for yourself and for your band, and I'm genuinely a fan of what you do.
That means so much to me, Jesse, really, especially coming from you.
Man, and it's been a pleasure just kind of being able to see your process and hearing your insights on composing and then using that as a vehicle to evolve as a player and all of that. Before we go today, I have a rapid fire question game that I would like us to do together.
Okay.
It's called 3, 2, 1. And I'd like you to share 3 albums that have been influential for you, 2 saxophone players, and 1 piece of advice.
Ooh, okay. Okay, 3 albums. Okay, I'm going to throw in a mix of things.
Okay.
I'm going to say one of the earliest albums that had an impact on me was actually a Boyz II Men record.
Amazing.
For those of you who are not familiar with Boyz II Men, they're an R&B vocal group, vocal quartet that was very prominent in the 80s and 90s, and they're still active today. But they were certainly kind of at their peak at that time. And I would have been maybe around 6 or 7 listening to some of their music, but I really gravitated towards the vocal harmony and what I soon later found out was actually coming from gospel music.
Yeah.
And I think more than anything, more than jazz, it was early 90s R&B music that got me interested in what I later found out was just Black American music.
Right.
And I don't think I understood what that was. And then later I realized it's actually coming from jazz.
Yeah.
And earlier forms of Black American music.
Right.
But 90s R&B for me, and still to this day, I hold very dear to my heart. I love a lot of those vocal groups like SWV, Boyz II Men, Jodeci, so many. Anyway, but the album 2, I think it's called, I listened to that record a lot as a kid. And that really introduced me to, like, I mean, obviously it was a pop version of gospel harmony. And that really pulled me into the world of jazz later, that I found out after having connected all the dots.
Yeah.
So that's the first album that had a huge influence on my musical development, I think.
Yeah.
And then ones that I later found through college, Wayne Shorter's Speak No Evil. The writing on that, I think I really found compelling. And I also kind of discovered Herbie Hancock through that record. And took me down another rabbit hole with his writing, which has been really influential to me. And then Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really nice diverse list there.
Yeah, certainly. But yeah, those have all been influential.
You know, before you tell us the 2 saxophone players that have been influential for you, yesterday I was, I think I was on Instagram and I saw a post from someone. He was playing a transcription of Killing Me Softly from Lauryn Hill. And, but there was a saxophone playing the melody. So I reached out to him, I was like, who is this? And it was Kenny Garrett. It was Kenny Garrett playing, I think it was a Warner Brothers records. They put a jam session together. With Joshua Redman and Brad Mildau. Have you heard that recording?
I have not, but I'm going to check it out. Yeah,
and he's playing, they play some standards on there and then some other tunes, but Kenny Garrett is playing Killing Me Softly.
Wow.
It's so good, you know, and again, there's that connection, because a lot of times people don't see the connection between pop or R&B and jazz, but it's all part of the same family of Black American music as well. So yeah. All right, take us through your 2 saxophone players.
Oh, this is really hard. But I think what is funny about me in some way is that I gravitate to tenor saxophone players more than alto.
Interesting.
So the 2 saxophone players for me are Sonny Rollins and Joe Henderson.
Wow. Okay.
And I think I chose those, to be honest, because I love all their records.
Yeah.
And also because each of them have a very thematic way of improvising that has always really resonated with me.
Wow. I'm going to break the rule here just for you.
Yeah.
Because you have such a unique sound on the saxophone, and as an altoist, I feel like if you really need to be serious about doing the homework about the sound of the alto.
Yeah.
To inform your own personal sound. So let's get a third person. Are there any alto players that have really influenced your sound?
Sure. Oh, okay. Well, then probably Bird, I would say.
Okay. There we go.
Because I did do a fair bit of transcribing of Charlie Parker. But also, I mean, Cannonball Adderley is up there too. Though I don't feel like I sound like him at all. He's had a huge influence on my playing as well.
Cool. What's the one piece of advice you want to leave with?
Yeah, okay. I would say if there's anything that you want to do creatively, don't ask anyone for permission to do so.
Wow.
Just do it. And I would say, again, like coming from my experience as like a very inexperienced saxophone player going through college and really not knowing my way or feeling a little bit lost after graduating and not sure if I would be pursuing music professionally as a career. And again, not having people call me per se. I wasn't one of those saxophone players, you know. So creating your own opportunity and your own platform to do things, I think, is really crucial, especially in this day and age, you know, like, I mean, there's still record labels in existence, but not as many. And
Right.
there's a lot more technological things at our fingertips to create music in ways that people wouldn't have done so otherwise like 20 years ago. So if you have an idea, whether it be for a song or even just to start your own band of any kind,
Yeah.
just do it. And don't wait for anyone to ask you first or to have to encourage you to do so. I think if you're really, you know, strong-willed about that, you have a really clear idea, just do it. Just do it.
And that's coming from the Juno-award winning Allison Au. That's some good advice, Allison. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure chatting with you and just hearing all
Likewise.
your insights. If you're listening and you want to connect directly with Allison, please check out her website. It's Allison Au. That's Allison A-A-U, sorry.
That's right.
.com. And you're on Instagram as well, right?
I am. Yeah. It's just Allison Au Music. Yeah.
Awesome. So thanks for listening. I hope that this conversation was both inspiring and that it empowers you to keep taking ground in your professional and creative journeys. I'm Jesse Ryan, and thanks for listening. I'll catch you on the next episode. Take care. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.